Hello there. Tonight we are going to take a dreamy little stroll through the sun-drenched, olive-slicked chaos of ancient Greece, a land of philosophers' statues with no pants and democracy. Sort of. But before you picture yourself lounging in a toga with figs and poetry, let's try waking up in a real Athenian household. Spoiler, it's going to be rough. You're sleeping on a lumpy straw mat, sweating through linen, and listening to your neighbor's goat argue with the dawn. And yes, the goat is winning. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Post your location and local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where and when you're listening from. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. You open your eyes to find the sun already creeping through a gap in the wooden shutter, no glass of course. You're inside a modest home built from sun-dried mud bricks, which have exactly zero interest in insulating you from anything. In summer, those bricks soak up heat like a happy sponge and radiate it right back into your bones. In winter, they act more like stone coffins, cold, damp, and unwelcoming. You're wrapped in a cloak that's seen better days. Your mattress is stuffed with straw that pokes in all the wrong places, and your pillow is either your arm or last year's tunic rolled up into a sad little lump. There's no concept of personal space. Your family sleeps in the same room. If you're lucky, you've staked out a corner not already claimed by your cousin's feet or the family goat. If you're unlucky, that goat has climbed onto your chest and is breathing into your eye socket. And speaking of eye sockets, there's a decent chance your face itches because of lice. Hygiene is, let's say, more of a suggestion than a system. Your nose twitches from the combined aroma of dust, sweat, olive oil, and whatever the goat contributed in the middle of the night. You rise not because you feel rested, but because the temperature has already climbed past mildly warm into stone-baked mortal territory. There is no breeze, there is no fan, there is only heat. The walls are radiating warmth like they've made a deal with Apollo himself. And the fun's only just begun. Water. Not in the house. There's no tap to turn, no sink to lean over. Instead, you grab a heavy clay jug and head out into the already blinding sun to fetch it from the public fountain, or if you live rurally, from a well. That's a nice goat-fertilized stroll away. On your way, you pass neighbors who look just as wilted as you do. One is balancing a jar of water on her head. Another is cursing quietly because he dropped his, and now he has to carry home the memory of what his shoulders went through for absolutely nothing. Historians still debate whether these daily water-fetching rituals were primarily for hydration or humiliation. You pass through the dusty street, which doubles as a trash dump, a gossip forum, and occasionally a latrine, depending on the hour and the level of civic despair. Your sandals slap on the sun-warmed stone, or maybe you're barefoot, in which case you're stepping on everything from donkey dung to crushed figs to... Is that a fish eyeball? Probably. Don't think about it. And now back home, sweaty and somehow dirtier than before you begin your morning routine, which does not include brushing your teeth or checking your phone because one hasn't been invented and the other is a stick. You might splash some water on your face. Maybe you rub your skin with olive oil, yes again, and then take out your trusty strigil, a curved bronze blade, to scrape it off along with a fine paste of sweat and dirt. Think of it like a spa day if your spa was public, loud, and mostly smelled like sheep. And no, there's no such thing as privacy. You're doing all of this either in the courtyard or the street with other people around, naked. No one blinks. Hygiene is communal, and privacy is for myths and philosophers. You're not bathed, you're slightly less greasy. By now you're hungry, which is unfortunate because breakfast is about as appetizing as licking a rock. You reach for a hard slab of barley bread masa, which has the density of guilt and the flavor of ancient disappointment. If you're fancy, you might have a dried fig or a smear of goat cheese that smells like betrayal. You dunk the barley in diluted wine, not because you're trying to get tipsy, but because the water is often unsafe. There's no filtration system, no boiling, no purification rituals unless you count hoping for the best. Everyone from toddlers to elders drinks weak wine like it's lemon water, and honestly, it's probably the safest part of your day. And here's an odd little detail. Women and children eat separately, often only after the men have finished. So not only is the food dry, stale, and emotionally abusive, it's also delayed if you weren't born with the right anatomy. By now, your tunic is sticking in places that linen should never cling. You're sweating already exhausted, and the sun has only just crested the wall of your neighbor's goat shed. But don't worry, this is actually the best part of your day. Because now you have to get dressed properly, haul things up hills, sit through impromptu philosophy ambushes, and maybe prepare for a war you didn't ask for. Ready? No. That's ancient Greece for you. And now, let's talk about how that sad excuse for breakfast is only going to get worse. So, you've survived the blazing heat of your mud brick oven, scraped the oil off your skin in public, and fetched your daily ration of warm water delicious. Now it's time for breakfast, or as the Greeks knew it, a stale bite of compromise. You sit, or more likely squat, next to your fellow bleary-eyed family members. There's no cozy kitchen table, no cushioned chairs, no coffee brewing in the background. There's just a corner of the courtyard, maybe a short stool if you're privileged, and a sad little heap of barley bread called maza. It's dense, dry, and about as satisfying as chewing on a clay roof tile. You pick it up and try to break it in half. It doesn't break, it resists. You gnaw at the edge like a determined squirrel. There's a mild crunch followed by a puff of flour, and for a moment you're not sure if you're eating or just inhaling sediment. You look around. Everyone else is doing the same, munching quietly, jaws grinding in unison like tired farm animals. There's no fruit salad, no yogurt, no sweet honey drizzle unless you live near a beekeeper and know how to bribe him with something better than a handshake and a head nod. There's no coffee, no eggs, no toasted bread with butter because ovens are expensive, time-consuming, and primarily reserved for feast days or someone's funeral. Your beverage of choice is more wine. Not the heady, rich kind with notes of plum and poetry, but the weak, half-watered variety that tastes like a grape had second thoughts. And you don't drink it because you want to feel sophisticated. You drink it because the water in your neighborhood has been used for everything from laundry to livestock bathing. Wine, even when diluted, is the closest thing you've got to safe hydration. This isn't brunch, it's survival. And here's the kicker: you eat fast. There's no idle chatter about dreams or upcoming errands. Meals are functional, like feeding time at the stables. You chew, you swallow, and you move on. There are no forks, no napkins, no Instagrammable flat lays of your barley brick beside a rustic amphora. Just fingers and an underlying sense of urgency. If you're a woman, the situation is somehow even worse. Not only are you eating the same sad excuse for bread, you're probably doing it alone, or with the kids after the men have eaten. In many homes, women weren't just sidelined from public life, they were literally kept separate, even during meals. You get leftovers in silence while cleaning up the crumbs of your husband's morning mediocrity. And yet, despite the culinary bleakness of the average Athenian breakfast, these are the same people who gave the World Symposium's lavish drinking parties, where men reclined on cushions and discussed poetry, philosophy, and whether Zeus would win in a cage match against Poseidon. Go figure. You'd think such lovers of wine and art would spare a little flair for breakfast, but no. The first meal of the day is so dreary it barely earned a mention in their poetry. Homer could write volumes about a ship launch or the curve of a warrior's shield, but maza. Not a single epic stanza. Even the gods, who are notorious for meddling in mortal affairs, never bothered to bless the morning table with so much as a golden fig. Oddly enough, the few foods that could elevate your breakfast like goat cheese or a scattering of olives are still out of reach unless you've got coin to spare or connections with a generous neighbor. And even then, it's all eaten cold. There's no reheating, no fire for morning meals. If you're eating warm food at breakfast, something has gone terribly wrong. Either you're celebrating a funeral or accidentally set your kitchen mat on fire. Now let's pause for a second and appreciate how absurdly boring this breakfast is. The people who invented geometry, drama, and democracy couldn't invent a better pastry. You're telling me a civilization that literally coined the phrase eudaimonia to describe the pursuit of flourishing couldn't figure out how to bake a croissant. Historians still debate whether this culinary austerity was cultural stoicism or just collective laziness. Regardless, your teeth are now sore from chewing, your stomach is full of grainy paste, and your mind is already drifting toward the 10 million other things you are expected to do today. There's no give yourself 10 minutes to digest. There's no gentle scrolling through morning scrolls, sipping tea by candlelight. There's just work, and lots of it. You stand up, wipe your hands on your tunic though the dust and grime now just blend in, and you brace yourself for the rest of your morning. Because, my friend, you are far from finished. You haven't even begun to dress yet. You haven't faced the sun, the chores, or the chance encounter with a neighbor trying to sell you a slightly used amphora that may or may not be cursed. But for a fleeting moment, let's acknowledge this small, humble ritual. The chewing of barley, the sip of wine, the silent nod exchanged between you and your brother as you both realize that no, this isn't going to get better. You gather your things, a belt for your tunic, maybe a pin or two if you're fancy, and you prepare to enter the real battlefield, the Greek street. You step outside and the light hits you like a wall. There's no protection from the sun unless you're a sailor with a wide-brimmed hat or a shepherd with an old cloth you've repurposed into a hood. You squint. The tunic that was already damp with sweat before breakfast now glues itself to your body like a clingy X. The fabric sticks, then shifts, then sticks again, always in the least flattering places. And guess what? There's no underwear. That's not a punchline, it's just ancient Greek reality. There are no bras, no boxers, no support of any kind. Your robe is a single awkwardly draped rectangle of linen, held together with a belt and an optimistic bronze pin. One wrong move, one gust of wind, and your philosophical outlook is exposed to the marketplace. Footwear. If you're well off, you might have leather sandals already worn and dusty. If you're poor, you're barefoot, which means that every step is a dance with broken pottery fish guts and donkey leftovers. It's not uncommon to get home with a splinter, a blister, and an inexplicable bruise shaped like a fig leaf. You're still chewing bits of barley from between your teeth as you pass the public fountain again. A child splashes water over his head. A woman with a basket glares at you for being in her way. Someone's goat bleats angrily from a rooftop. You breathe in the scent of sun-warmed humanity, animal sweat, and rotting fruit. And then you hear it. The distant nasal call of a man asking strangers, "What is justice?" You sigh. Socrates is out early. But before he corners you into an impromptu ethics seminar, you've got things to do. You've got wood to carry, errands to run, and possibly a war to prepare for. And that's assuming you're a man. If you're a woman, your path leads back inside to the grindstone, the spindle, the child tugging at your hem, and the in-laws waiting for fresh bread. And you thought breakfast was hard. You've powered through the culinary despair of your barley brick breakfast, dodged donkey droppings on your barefoot commute. And now it's time for the next vital ritual in your daily Athenian life, getting clean. Or at least trying to. And make no mistake, clean in ancient Greece is more about appearances than aroma. Think ritual over results, oil over soap, and group nudity over personal boundaries. There are no showers, no scented body washes, and definitely no hot water on demand. If you're a common citizen, and you most certainly are, your bath today will involve a few cold splashes from a clay jug at a public fountain or courtyard basin. It's early, but the heat already clings to the air like a thick shawl, and your body, after a night on a straw mat, feels creaky and coated with yesterday's dust and the oily ghost of last week's hygiene attempt. You begin by taking out your precious flask of olive oil. Not the imported basil-infused kind that comes in dark green glass with a fancy cork, but plain, thick, yellowish olive oil, maybe pressed by your cousin's cousin last summer. And you're not using it for moisturizing. No, your goal is to collect the dirt. You rub it generously over your skin, coating every sunburned inch until you are glistening like a philosophical rotisserie chicken. Then come to strigil a curved bronze blade, slightly dulled with age, used to scrape the oil off your body along with whatever it's managed to pick up. Sweat, grime, dust, and shame all gone in one slow scraping arc. The process is oddly satisfying and entirely public. If you're at the gymnasium, which you might be if you're male, you'll be doing this while standing naked among dozens of others doing the same thing. No one's blinking, no one's embarrassed. This is just the morning grind. Privacy please, that's for barbarians. And for the record, this method doesn't leave you squeaky clean. It leaves you less dirty. Slightly. You still smell like Olive's effort and whatever your neighbor was cooking in their open-air kitchen last night. But in a society where everyone is using the same technique, no one really notices. You're not trying to smell good, you're just trying not to be the worst smelling guy in the Agra. Let's not forget the teeth. No toothbrush, no minty toothpaste, no floss. You might rub your gums with crushed charcoal if you're feeling fancy. Maybe rinse your mouth with vinegar, which sounds refreshing, until it makes your eyes water and your tongue go numb. Some folks chew on twigs or frayed sticks, hoping the friction does something. Mostly, you're trusting in the gods and hoping your bad breath blends into the general aroma of the city warm bodies, oil, smoke, and goat. Speaking of goats, remember that charming friend from earlier, the one who watched you sleep and possibly shared your pillow. He's also been contributing to the shared environment, which is why you'll want to dab on a touch of perfume if you got any. A little myrrh or rose oil on the neck might help. Of course, this won't last long. As soon as you step outside and start walking those 5 miles to the Agora, you'll be sweating again. Laundry rare. Clothing is precious, and washing it takes time, effort, and a river. If your tunic hasn't been rinsed since last festival season, that's perfectly normal. Most people wear their garments until they're stiff enough to stand up on their own, or until they literally fall apart and need to be patched with someone else's older tunic. You might get creative and beat it against rocks down by the water. There's no detergent, just friction, sunshine, and resignation. You tie your slightly crusty tunic with a belt. No zippers, no buttons, and you hope the pin holding the folds together doesn't give up mid-stride. Because again, there's no underwear. Nothing is securing your dignity except a small, slightly tarnished brooch that you got from your aunt's wedding dowry 10 years ago. As you adjust the folds of your linen, your mind drifts. You wonder how the Olympians manage. Surely, Aphrodite doesn't scrape herself with a bronze blade or bathe next to a guy humming off key. Maybe the gods have scented clouds or marble bathhouses with ambrosia taps. Or maybe even they are winging it like you. You step out into the brightness of the Athenian morning. The sun hits your freshly oiled skin, and you realize that while you may be cleaner, you're also more flammable. You quickly cover up before you're cooked like a dolma on a rooftop. The road under your feet is already warming up. If you're lucky, your sandals are still intact. If not, it's a barefoot journey on stone heat and animal residue. You try to distract yourself with thoughts of the upcoming day errands, to run conversations to half understand, maybe a philosopher to avoid. Your stomach growls, but breakfast is over. No second servings, no brunch. If you're hungry, you'll just have to chew on your expectations until sunset. An odd fact floats through your mind. Did you know the ancient Greeks didn't really use soap until centuries later? That's right. Soap was more of a Roman thing. Greeks believed that oil and scraping was superior. Whether it was or not, well, historians still debate that. As you navigate the narrow alleys, you catch sight of a small line forming near a communal cistern. Women are chatting while balancing jugs on their hips, kids are splashing water, and someone's old uncle is arguing with a cat. It's a typical Athenian morning. The city is alive with the sounds of sandals scraping stone sheet being herded, and distant voices from the marketplace rising like heat waves. You pass the gymnasium where naked men are training in the art of wrestling, running, and occasionally shouting about Homer. You smell the oil and sweat and hear the clack of shields being lifted. The men are oiled up like roast pigs and flinging each other to the ground with cheerful brutality. It's a spectacle. You pause for a moment to watch a scuffle turn into a full-on tumble. One man emerges victorious, the other covered in sand and dignity wounds. They'll be scraping oil off each other soon, publicly, loudly. You move on. Your skin is now drying in patches. The olive oil has done its job, but you still feel dusty, like a well-used amphora. Your hair is probably sticking to your forehead in thin, dark threads. No shampoo, no comb. You try to run your fingers through it, but that only redistributes the problem. Maybe you should visit that one guy in the Agra who sells tiny clay pots of rose balm. Then again, he's also rumored to be a thief. Hard pass. And here's a fun academic. Aside, there are archaeological debates about whether the use of strigils was ever as widespread as ancient texts suggest. Some claim it was mainly for athletes and upper-class men. Others argue that the lower classes adopted it out of practicality. Either way, if you want to fit in today, you're scraping. So, what have we learned this morning? Getting clean in ancient Greece is less about smelling good and more about showing that you at least tried. You oiled up, you scraped, and now you're shiny, sore, and socially acceptable for a few hours anyway. But don't get too comfortable. The sun's climbing, your chores are waiting, the agora is starting to buzz. And if you don't get a move on, you'll miss your chance to be mildly disappointed by the fishmonger's fresh octopus. Now grab your sandals, tighten your tunic pin, and head out into the day. You're halfway clean, mildly oiled, decently dressed if you can call a loosely folded rectangle of linen, dressed and just about ready to face the ancient Greek world in all its sun-scorched, goat-scented glory. But first, let's talk about the sheer absurdity that is your wardrobe. Let's start with your chiton. That's your basic outfit. A big piece of cloth draped and fastened at the shoulders, sometimes belted at the waist and otherwise left to gravity's goodwill. There are no seams. There is no tailoring. It's a toga burrito situation, and you're the filling. If it's winter, maybe you layer on a imation, another rectangular piece of cloth, heavier like an ancient shawl. But there are no zippers, no buttons, no snaps, just pins, knots, and hope. Your clothes aren't white unless you're super wealthy and obsessive. Most people's tunics are a dusty beige or light brown, the color of old parchment or yesterday's bread. Dyes exist, but they're expensive. Purple reserved for the rich or for that one guy who always talks about how much he paid for it. If you're lucky, you might own a second tunic. If you're really lucky, it might not smell like smoke sweat or disappointment. And don't get me started on windy days. You think Marilyn Monroe had a problem? Try pinning your only outfit together with one brooch and a prayer, then walking across a sun-blasted square while Poseidon gets frisky. The odds of an accidental wardrobe malfunction are not low. Ancient Greek society might have been more comfortable with nudity, but that doesn't mean you want to flash a priestess while holding a basket of figs. That's not the kind of legacy you want. Now let's discuss your feet, or more precisely their suffering. If you're of modest means, you probably own a pair of leather sandals with straps that dig into your ankles and soles thin enough to feel every pebble crack and mystery smear on the road. If you're poor, you go barefoot. Yes, barefoot through streets filled with animal droppings, sharp rocks, discarded bones, and the kind of mush that defies polite explanation. Imagine walking across a skillet that's been seasoned with goat hooves and the crushed dreams of fishmongers. And there are no socks. There's no foot powder, no arch support, no memory foam. You get calluses or you get blisters or both. And when you get home, there's no hot foot soak waiting for you. You scrape the dirt off with a dull knife or rinse in a bucket and hope the smell fades by morning. If you think you can protect your skin from the sun, think again. There's no sunscreen, no SPF. The Aegean sun is merciless, and it doesn't care how philosophical you are going to burn. Farmers sometimes wear wide-brimmed hats made of straw. Sailors may wear caps to keep the glare off the water. But for the average Athenian, your defense against UV rays is a piece of linen and sheer audacity. Now, if you're imagining your clothes billowing romantically as you stride through a sunlit agora, let me stop you there. The reality is sweat, lots of it. The linen clings, it sticks, it shifts into folds that make walking feel like a geometry puzzle. And the smell. Let's just say if you've never worn the same unwashed garment for 2 weeks in Mediterranean heat, you haven't lived the full Greek experience. Here's an odd fact for you. Nudity, especially male nudity, was totally normal in certain settings. At the gymnasium, men trained and exercised completely in the buff. That's right, running laps, wrestling, practicing discus, all without a stitch. Women, on the other hand, weren't even allowed inside. Public spaces had a different sense of modesty, but the gym was basically a social hub, where you could make friends, debate philosophy, and show off your glutes in one convenient location. Historians still debate whether this level of public nudity was a form of body positivity or just a societal excuse for showing off your abs. And in case you thought the clothing dilemma was limited to civilians, think again. Soldiers wore even less. The iconic hoplite, your average Greek foot soldier wore a short tunic called an exomis, often cinched up above the knee for mobility. Great for battle, less great for modesty. Now let's talk about maintenance. You can't just toss your chiton into a wash basin and call it a day. Laundry is a labor-intensive ritual. If you have access to a stream or river, you might beat your clothes against the rocks until the dust and olive oil surrender. There's no soap, just ash or lye and a whole lot of scrubbing. If you're wealthier, you might pay someone else to do this for you, a domestic slave or a launderer who uses ancient detergent and elbow grease to perform textile miracles. If your poor laundry happens once a month, maybe. More likely you air the garment out and hope the sun kills whatever lives inside. Sometimes you might even try to perfume your tunic by hanging it near a hearth with scented herbs. Other times you just wear it out and hope people are too polite to mention the smell. You make your way to the agora careful with every step. You're constantly adjusting your tunic to keep it from dragging in the mud or exposing too much ankle, which, let's be honest, is the only part of you that's ever felt a breeze. You hold your belt tight. If the knot slips or the pin gives out, you're one wrong turn away from becoming that guy. You know the one. The air around you smells like smoke, olives, fish, and humanity. Vendors shout, donkeys snort. Someone is playing a flute with more enthusiasm than talent. You pass a man with a tray of grilled eels, a child chasing a chicken, and a cart full of rotting pomegranates. A couple of men argue in front of the pottery stall, one gesturing with a half-eaten fig, the other holding a broken oar. A third man stares into the sky, muttering about metaphysics. Somewhere in the middle of this mess you blend in. Because everyone's wearing roughly the same thing, sweating the same sweat, dodging the same chickens. Clothing isn't about self-expression here. It's about functionality. You dress to survive the heat, to avoid being arrested for indecency, and to minimize chafing. And you pray silently, constantly, that your brooch doesn't give out when you're bending over to inspect olives. That's how fragile your dignity is today. One faulty pin away from catastrophe. Even your accessories are limited. If you're lucky, you might wear a simple fibula pin, a leather strap, or a pouch for carrying coins and a few herbs. No pockets. You tie things to your belt or stuff them in your folds, which is how ancient pickpocketing was born. Just reach into someone's tunic flap and hope for the best. So let's take stock. You're dressed like a burrito, sweating through layers. Your feet are either filthy or bleeding. Your belt is half knotted. Your hair hasn't been washed in a week, and you're praying the gods spare you from both heat stroke and humiliation. And remember, this is your everyday look. This isn't festival wear or special occasion garb. This is what you wear to shop, debate, fetch water, and possibly fight a war. Still think you'd rock a toga? Now let's get you moving. You've got military training to attend. Yes, even if you're a philosopher. You're sticky, sunburned, and wearing what feels like a collapsing linen curtain, held together with little more than faith. And now, because fate is cruel and you're a male citizen of ancient Greece, it's time for military training. You might be thinking, surely not me. I'm more of a theater and figs kind of guy. Too bad, because if you're a freeborn male in most Greek city-states, especially Athens or Sparta, then congratulations. You're automatically enrolled in the unofficial lifelong draft. Whether you love swords or get nosebleeds from sharp olives, the spear is your new best friend. You don't enlist, you are enlisted. By virtue of being born male and local, no applications, no waivers, you're on the list. Now, depending on where you live, your training begins either gently or with blood and tears. Let's take the Spartan route first, because if we're going to talk about miserable childhoods, we might as well go big. In Sparta, military training begins at the age of 7. That's right, 7. While your Athenian cousins are still arguing about Homer and chasing goats, you're being yanked away from your mother and dropped into the Egorgy system. It's a state-run boy boot camp where the curriculum includes starvation, beatings, isolation, and the occasional motivational speech delivered by someone missing an eye. Your meals are deliberately meager. You're expected to steal food to survive, but here's the kicker. If you get caught, you're punished. Not for stealing, for being bad at it. It's not about morality, it's about competence. If you're lucky, you learn quickly. If not, you go hungry and bruised. Clothing. A single cloak, one, all year. You sleep outside in winter, you wrestle in summer, you wash when the rain does it for you. You train your body until it stops complaining. You fight other boys in organized brawls, you memorize war songs, you learn how to march, chant, obey, and above all, never ever complain. The ultimate goal, turn you into a weapon that thinks just enough to follow orders. By the time you're a teenager, you're a hardened, half-starved, slightly feral soldier in training who can skin a rabbit with one hand and throw a javelin in the dark. And you're still not officially in the army. That comes at 20. Now, if you're from Athens, it's a little more civilized, but don't get comfortable. You still begin your military service in your late teens. The ephebik training lasts about 2 years. You'll practice with spears, swords, and shields. You'll learn how to march in formation, how to row in sync with 200 other sweaty men, and how to stand very still while someone yells at you in iambic pentameter. There's still discipline. There's still hardship. And there's a strong sense of civic duty. In Athens, being a soldier isn't just about fighting, it's about citizenship. The spear and the vote go hand in hand. If you don't serve, you don't participate in democracy. If you want to be heard, you first have to be loud with a spear. Now let's talk weapons. If you can afford it, you'll supply your own gear. That means a bronze helmet, hot heavy, visibility questionable, a breastplate, claustrophobic greaves for your shins, tight, clunky, and a round hoplon shield the size of a small table. You'll carry a spear and a short sword. Altogether, the whole ensemble weighs about as much as a well-fed goat. And yes, you have to carry it. All day, often uphill, in the sun, while wearing a wool cloak and sandals that have the cushioning of a tortilla. If you can't afford all that shiny bronze gear, you improvise. Some poorer soldiers fight in leather armor or plain tunics. Others bring only a spear and a lot of optimism. These light infantry types are called Siloi. And let's be honest, they're the first to fall. Ancient Greek warfare doesn't reward underdressing. Now here's the real charm of Greek battle tactics, the phalanx. It's a tight rectangular block of men shield to shield, spear to spear. You stand shoulder to shoulder with dozens, sometimes hundreds of other soldiers, all relying on the guy next to them not to trip, panic, or drop their shield. The entire formation moves as one. You push, you shove, you stab, and if you fall, the guy behind you either lifts you up or steps over you. Often both. It's crowded, loud, slippery with sweat, blood, and occasionally breakfast. Visibility is poor, breathing is difficult, and your one job is to keep moving forward no matter what happens to the guy in front of you. Historians still debate how much of the phalanx's effectiveness came from its strategy versus sheer force and panic momentum. You don't just fight when you're at war. When you're not actively killing someone, you're preparing to. That means training drills weapon maintenance and endless practice runs up and down dusty hillsides. You polish your helmet until you can see your own sunburnt reflection. You sharpen your spearhead even though it's already sharp enough to slice olives mid-air. And because this is Greece where even combat comes with civic engagement, you also spend time debating military strategies in the assembly. You stand in a crowd sweaty and armored while someone with a good beard and questionable judgment suggests invading somewhere for honor. You vote, you argue, then you go back to rowing the trireme. Speaking of which naval service, if you're poor and can't afford a full hoplite kit, you might serve in the Navy. A trireme is a sleek oared warship with 3 levels of rowers packed in tighter than amphorae in a wine cellar. Rowing is brutal. It's sweaty, rhythmic, and never-ending. You row in sync with dozens of others while the ship's captain shouts timing from above. Your back hurts. Your hands blister. You can't stand upright inside the hull. And if the ship crashes or flips in battle, which it will, good luck, swimming in bronze greaves and a panic attack. There's no veterans' pay, no pensions, no retirement party with roasted goat and a lyre quartet. If you survive a battle, you go home, patch up your wounds, and wait for the next one. If you die, you get a small stone slab carved with a vague compliment like brave or loyal. Maybe someone pours a libation in your name. Maybe not. And even if you're a pacifist, you're not off the hook. Socrates, yes, the same guy who annoyed half the city with his questions, served as a soldier. He marched in battle. He fought at Delium. Philosophers were expected to bleed just like everyone else. There is no I'm more of a thinker exemption in ancient Greece. So today, your tasks include going to the agora, dealing with public nudity at the gymnasium, sweating through your chiton, and holding a shield bigger than your torso up a hill because your general said the view was more strategic. Oh, and you might die from a javelin, or a tripping accident, or from sunstroke before the enemy even arrives. All of this just for the right to be called a citizen. And yet somehow this was all considered normal, expected, even honorable. You're not done yet. Because after all this training and discipline, you still need to show up at the assembly tomorrow and help decide whether it's time to go to war again. Now take off your armor carefully. It's hot tight and smells like boiled armpit. You've earned a break. Too bad you won't get one. You've just hauled your sweaty, chafed body up and down hills in full bronze gear. You've practiced formations, sharpened a spear that already looked ready to murder philosophy itself, and maybe avoided stepping on goat droppings for the first time today. And now, because being a Greek man isn't exhausting enough, you're expected to take part in something even more rigorous than war, democracy. But don't get too excited. This isn't the kind of democracy you're imagining. There are no ballots, no cute I voted stickers, and certainly no campaign ads. It's not democracy for everyone. It's democracy for about 10% of the population, and the other 90% just have to hope they don't get crushed under a philosophical debate about tax grain collection. Let's break it down. To participate in the Athenian ecclesia, that's the assembly, you must be male, over 18, born to 2 Athenian parents, and not a slave, a foreigner. Metic, or a woman. In other words, if you're a common woman, a hard-working immigrant, or the guy who literally built the Parthenon but happened to be enslaved while doing it, sorry, democracy doesn't think you're qualified to speak. Historians still debate whether this strict exclusivity was a deliberate strategy to consolidate power or just another symptom of ancient patriarchy. Anyway, if you do meet the qualifications, congratulations. You're now expected to spend a decent portion of your adult life showing up to mass meetings with hundreds, sometimes thousands of other men to debate everything from building roads to declaring war. These meetings happen at the Nix, a big open-air platform cut into a hill. There's no shade, no seating, just you, your tunic a hunk of barley in your pocket, and a sea of other citizens shouting at each other about naval funding. And when I say debate, I don't mean polite exchanges of ideas. No, I mean full-on verbal combat men yelling, stomping, waving arms, accusing each other of incompetence, cowardice, and occasionally goat theft. It's loud, chaotic, and not even remotely moderated. Oh, and guess what? There are no professional politicians. no elected senators. Every single man present is the government. You don't vote for a guy to make the decision, you are the guy. One day you're arguing about where to build a bridge. The next you're personally responsible for approving grain imports or military campaigns. Don't have any experience in logistics or urban planning, doesn't matter. Just yell louder than the other guy and hope your tunic doesn't fall off mid-rant. And here's a fun twist. The Athenians loved using lotteries to pick government officials. Important jobs like managing the treasury, supervising public festivals, or judging legal cases weren't assigned to experts. They were handed out randomly. Your uncle who once tried to cook an olive and burned down his house, he might be overseeing the war budget next week. They believed randomness prevented corruption. In reality, it sometimes just distributed incompetence evenly. There was also a jury system. Again, random. Thousands of citizens might be selected to serve as jurors in trials even for serious crimes like murder or treason. There were no judges in the modern sense. The crowd was the judge. Your fishmonger could be deciding the fate of your property. The man who once tried to sell you spoiled olives could now legally fine you for blasphemy. And you'd think being too popular might help your political future, right? Wrong. Enter ostracism. Perhaps the most delightfully petty feature of Athenian democracy. Once a year, citizens could vote to exile someone for 10 years. No trial, no explanation, just write a name on a broken piece of pottery called an ostrakon. And if 6,000 people agree that person has to pack up and go, not because they broke a law, just because people decided they were getting too big for their sandals. Imagine rising to fame because of your brilliant speeches or military victories, only to find yourself kicked out of town because someone got tired of hearing your name at dinner. That's what happened to Themistocles, the guy who literally saved Athens from the Persians. Yeah, they ostracized him later, gratitude, ancient Greek style. And the process wasn't exactly private. Your name being scratched into hundreds of clay shards is a pretty public way to get cancelled. You come back after 10 years if you come back and pretend nothing happened. Oh, hey guys, I just spent a decade reflecting in exile, no big deal. But for now, you're still in the city, standing in the assembly, trying not to pass out under the sun, while someone near you delivers a long-winded speech about how building a new port will attract more traders. A man near you keeps shouting, shipbuilders are liars, while another tries to recite poetry in support of raising the olive tax. You nod, you yawn. You consider chewing on your sandal strap. There's no microphone, no speaker cue. You want to be heard. You step up and bellow. And the crowd will absolutely interrupt you if they think your argument is dumb. There's clapping, whistling, booing, and more than one occasion where a well-aimed fruit gets involved. You look around at the sea of robes and sweaty foreheads and realize you're not just witnessing democracy, you are democracy. That guy scratching his armpit is also debating national policy, the man trying to swat flies with his hat. Probably voted on grain tariffs last week. And this wasn't occasional civic duty, it was relentless. If you were eligible, you were expected to show up and engage. The city paid small stipends for attendance to make sure poorer citizens could afford to participate. Of course, the payment was minimal, and you still had to take time off from whatever trade farm or goat-based hustle was keeping your family alive. Still, the idea of collective rule was revolutionary. For the first time in human history, governance wasn't strictly the domain of kings or priests. Ordinary men, sunburned, underfed, and often barely literate, held the reins of power. They decided who led, who fought, who lived, and who went into exile. But don't mistake this for utopia. Women silenced, slaves silenced, foreigners who paid taxes, built ships, and contributed to the economy silenced. You, dear listener, with your passport and modern sensibilities also silenced. If you showed up in ancient Athens expecting to join in the democratic experiment, you'd be turned away at the gates. They might let you stay for the festival. Maybe, if you brought wine. And here's the final irony. Some of the most important political minds in history. Plato, for example, were deeply skeptical of democracy. Plato thought Putting power in the hands of the masses was like giving the helm of a ship to a bunch of drunk passengers. He preferred philosopher kings. You know, the quiet thinkers who don't throw olives during debate. Still, for all its flaws, Athenian democracy laid the groundwork for modern systems. Representative government, jury trials, civic responsibility, all of it echoes from the sweaty stone steps of the Pnyx. But none of that helps you right now as you try to decide whether to vote for the construction of new public fountains or support yet another expedition to some city-state you've never heard of. Your head hurts, your tunic is stuck to your back, a man behind you just sneezed into your hair, and someone just handed you a broken potshot and asked, "Who are we kicking out this year?" Your mind goes blank. You write down the first name you can think of, Socrates. Well, that might come back to haunt you. So you've marched, shouted, voted, and maybe just accidentally condemned a philosopher to death by pottery. Time for a break, right? Well, not if you're a womanist in ancient Greece. Because while the men are out debating war strategies and exiling their friends for being too charismatic, you've been awake since before sunrise. And no, not for a little yoga and some mindful journaling. You're grinding grain, hauling water, weaving cloth, raising children, managing servants if your family has any, and preparing meals that will be eaten by others before you get to touch a crumb. Let's be clear. For the vast majority of women in classical Athens, public life does not exist. You don't vote, you don't own land, you don't go to school beyond what's necessary to keep a household running. You don't go to the theater. You definitely don't hang out naked at the gymnasium. Your entire existence is built around one sacred mission: stay home and stay invisible. Say it. Your world is the gynoecium, the women's quarters. That's your office, your lounge, your kitchen, your prison. If you're respectable, your feet barely touch the public road. If someone sees you outside too often, people start whispering that you might be a courtesan, or worse, a Spartan. And while we're on that note, let's pause for a second and talk about the Spartan women. Those mysterious muscled outliers of ancient femininity. They're the exception to every rule. In Sparta, girls are educated. They exercise in public. They shout back at men. They can own property, inherit land, and they don't eat meals behind a screen while their brothers recite Homer. But before you pack your bags for the Peloponnese, remember the Spartan women are only free because their society is obsessed with one thing: warfare. Your job as a Spartan woman is to give birth to warriors, strong ones, many of them. If you have a son, great. If you have a weak son, shame. If you have no sons, you better hope you look good in black, because disgrace is coming for you. Historians still debate whether the freedom of Spartan women was genuine empowerment or just another way of producing better soldiers. But let's come back to Athens, where your daily life starts in the gynoecium, often a single room where you live with your daughters, your female slaves, and whatever loom is currently trapping your tunic. You spin wool, weaving thread with such precision and repetition that it becomes second nature. You make clothes for the whole household. You mend, patch, and occasionally embroider if you're feeling fancy. All of this is done while monitoring the children and managing the food stores. If your family has slaves, you direct them. If it doesn't, you are them. Cooking your job, bread, grind the barley yourself, water, walk to the fountain with the heavy jugs and pray that you don't trip on a neighbor's discarded sandal and spill it all. Again, there's no retirement. There's no you time. There's no sipping wine while journaling in a garden. There's just work. And let's talk about marriage. Or more accurately, the trade agreement your father negotiated with some man twice your age. You're married off in your early teens, 13 or 14 if you're lucky, younger if the dowry is right. Love is not part of the arrangement. Compatibility irrelevant. Your husband is chosen based on family ties, property, and the hope that you can pop out sons like pomegranates. You leave your childhood home and move into your husband's, often with a mother-in-law who sees you as an unproven investment. Your value is your womb. You are praised for modesty, for obedience, for silence. Your opinion is rarely requested. Your laughter is best kept behind a curtain. Sex education. It doesn't exist. You're expected to know what to do, when to do it, and never to speak of it. Childbirth is dangerous. There are no epidurals, no hospitals, no sterile tools. You might be attended by a midwife if she's sober and skilled. Otherwise, it's up to you, the gods, and a few herbs that may or may not make you vomit. If you die during childbirth, and many do, your gravestone might simply read wife of... with no further detail. Your name becomes secondary, your legacy biological. If you survive, congratulations. You now raise the children, teach the girls to weave, the boys to read, and keep the household running while your husband attends symposia, watches theater debates, justice, and occasionally votes to send someone into exile because their toga looked too new. Want to go to a play? Not happening. Want to attend a debate? Dream on. Want to be a poet? Only if you write in secret. Want to visit a market alone? Only if you want to be talked about until the end of the century. Your only acceptable public appearance is during religious festivals, when women gather veiled and silent to honor goddesses. And even then, you're escorted. There are exceptions, of course. Some women become hetairai, courtesans who are educated, clever, and occasionally powerful in their own way. These women attend symposia, have intellectual conversations, play the lyre, and engage in witty banter with philosophers. But they are not respectable. They exist outside the rules, often adored, but never honored. They are both envied and scorned. For the average Athenian woman, the highest praise you can receive is this: she was modest, she was quiet, she stayed inside. Oddly, the same society that worshipped Athena, the goddess of wisdom, and Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, couldn't trust its real women to even walk to the corner fountain without male supervision. But make no mistake, despite being pushed to the margins, women still shape the home, the family, and the rhythm of daily life. They are teachers, managers, healers, and spiritual anchors. They are strong because they have to be, even if society pretends not to notice. And behind closed doors, they talk, they share, they joke, they grieve. In the absence of rights, they form their own networks of wisdom. A neighbor's midwife knows which herb stops bleeding. A cousin knows how to sing a lullaby that brings sleep in under a minute. A grandmother remembers which offerings Artemis likes best. These are not trivial things. They are survival. So no, you're not at the assembly, but you're holding a family together with nothing but patience, persistence, and a half-finished loom that's 2 months behind schedule. The sun is high now. You're kneading dough with one hand while calming a crying child with the other. The courtyard smells like yeast, sweat, and fig syrup. A bird calls. A distant shout echoes from the agora. Your husband will return later with his opinions, his dusty sandals, and a list of things he's decided should change, starting with how often the oil jars are refilled. And you will nod. You will agree. Then you'll go back to what actually matters, making the household work. Because in a world where women are silenced, your strength speaks in actions, not words. Now back to your loom. The winter festival's coming and your daughter needs a new tunic. If you don't make it, no one will. While the women of ancient Greece work quietly in the background, weaving, grinding, raising future citizens and gods, forbid occasionally forming opinions, another class of people supports every part of society, yet receives no thanks, no rights, and no voice. Let's talk about slavery. Not the metaphorical kind where you're enslaved to your boss or your schedule. This is literal, institutionalized, everyday slavery, so commonplace in ancient Greece that most people didn't even stop to question it. Not philosophers, not lawmakers, not even playwrights known for their dramatic insights into suffering. In Athens alone, it's estimated that 1/3 of the population were slaves. That means for every 2 free people walking around in sweaty chitons, there was likely 1 person forced to serve them, cook for them, clean up after them, raise their children, and sometimes even die for them. Slavery wasn't limited to the rich. Even modest households, if they had any means at all, might own 1 or 2 enslaved people, often assigned the most grueling and thankless tasks. And here's the unsettling part: there was no racial basis to slavery in ancient Greece. You could be from Thrace, Syria, Asia Minor, or even another part of Greece. Wrong war, wrong city-state, wrong side of a pirate raid, and boom, your freedom vanished. You didn't even need to be conquered to end up enslaved. You might have been born into it. Your mother was a slave, so you are too. No questions, no paperwork, no appeals, just inheritance of chains, not land. Historians still debate just how many slaves were born versus captured, but one thing's clear, the supply never ran out. War, piracy, debt, and bad luck kept the market stocked. So what does life look like if you're enslaved? If you're in the countryside, it means backbreaking work in fields under the punishing Mediterranean sun, planting, harvesting, carrying heavy loads day after day. There's no lunch break, no shade, no take five. You wake up in the dark and collapse long after sunset. You're lucky if you get a dry spot to sleep and a crust of barley bread. If you work in a wealthier urban household, you might serve as a cook cleaner or childminder. You're responsible for rising before your masters, preparing their morning wine water cleaning, their dusty courtyards, and attending to their whims. You eat after them, if anything's left. You sleep in a corner sometimes under a stairwell or beside the family's animals. You keep your head down and your voice soft. If your master is a merchant, you might be put to work handling books, assisting with trade, even managing money. Yes, there were literate, skilled slaves who essentially ran businesses, while their owners reaped the profits. You could be highly intelligent, highly competent, and still be considered property. And if you're really unlucky, you end up in the mines. The silver mines of Lorient near Athens were a death sentence. You worked underground in narrow shafts with barely enough room to crawl. Children were often sent in fur small enough to slip through cracks and push ore into baskets. There's no air circulation. You inhale dust or in sweat. The heat is unbearable. Collapse is common. So is death. There were no protections, no limits, no labor rights. If you stopped moving, they replaced you. If you tried to escape, you were branded mutilated or executed. And yet Greek society didn't just tolerate this, it depended on it. Slaves built the temples, rowed the ships, mined the metals, cleaned the symposia halls. They whispered lullabies to the sons of philosophers. They wrote down notes for physicians. They polished armor and plucked chickens and emptied chamber pots. Even the democracy that Athens is so proud of was made possible in part because slaves did all the day-to-day work. Someone had to keep the streets swept and the children clothed, while the men of the city argued about tax reform on the Knicks. And the philosophers, they weren't immune, even. Aristotle, beloved by thinkers everywhere, defended slavery. He claimed some people were slaves by nature, lacking the rational soul of a free man. Yes, the same guy who taught logic, ethics, and the golden mean also said some humans were destined to be owned. Nice. Here's a particularly sharp irony. Enslaved people could be smarter, better educated, and more competent than the free citizens they served. There were slaves who taught their masters' children, slaves who were skilled doctors, accountants, and musicians. But regardless of ability, they were still property, no rights, no say, no protection. Even if a slave earned their freedom, usually through savings, a master's death, or good behavior, their life didn't suddenly become easy. Freedmen remained socially inferior. They couldn't become full citizens. They couldn't vote, own land in many cases, or serve in government. They often still worked for their former owners and were expected to remain loyal. Freedom was more like a lease. You had your life back, but never your status. Slavery in ancient Greece wasn't questioned much. There was no abolition movement, no uprising for human rights, no dramatic speeches from the Senate floor calling for change. To most Greeks, slavery was as normal as sandals and sunshine. It was the background noise of society. But let's pause and acknowledge something odd in a culture so enamored with freedom, so obsessed with libertas. Why was slavery so foundational? Because freedom in ancient Greece was a very specific, very exclusive thing. It didn't mean all people deserve liberty. It meant I, as a male citizen of this city, deserve to not be enslaved. Everyone else, not my problem. And to their credit or condemnation, the Greeks didn't pretend otherwise. There were no euphemisms, no talk of servants or indentured laborers. Slaves were doulois property, people who could be beaten, sold, or killed without recourse. Their names are rarely recorded, their stories barely remembered. They lived, worked, suffered, and died in the margins of history. But they were there, always there, holding up the temples, the theatres, the homes, and the hollow illusion of equality. So next time you picture the majesty of the Parthenon gleaming white above the city of Athens, remember who carried the stones, who carved the friezes, who hauled the marble in 100-degree heat while the architects argued over columns. It wasn't democracy, it wasn't philosophy, it was slaves. And if you think that part of ancient Greece sounds a little too brutal to be real, well, you're not wrong. But it was real. And you're still a free man standing in the agora, sweating in your tunic, sipping wine water as you discuss justice with someone who had their laundry done by a woman they bought. So maybe don't talk too loudly about virtue. You've debated democracy, trained for war, and perhaps just for fun, casually ignored the thousands of enslaved people who keep the city functioning while you complain about fig taxes. Your sunburned sore and your tunic smells like 3-day-old fish oil. But don't worry, your day is about to take a turn. You're not feeling well. Your head aches, your joints are stiff, your stomach is staging a quiet rebellion. You might be coming down with something, but unfortunately, this is ancient Greece, and medicine is not ideal. You don't go to a hospital. That concept doesn't exist yet. No ER, no friendly nurse named Tina, no neat little plastic bracelet with your birthday on it. If you're sick, you stay home. If you're lucky, someone in your family knows a few home remedies. If not well, the gods will decide your prognosis. In ancient Greece, illness isn't just physical. It's spiritual, emotional, even cosmic. Maybe you're ill because you drank some dodgy well water, maybe it's because your black bile is acting up, or maybe you forgot to sacrifice to Asclepius last week and now the god of healing is ghosting you in the worst way. Your options for treatment depend heavily on who's nearby. Maybe your neighbor knows some herbal cures. Maybe a traveling healer is passing through town. Maybe your cousin insists she once cured a fever by sleeping with garlic under her pillow and praying to Apollo. You're skeptical, but also too tired to argue. And then there's Hippocrates. Ah yes, the so-called father of medicine. He's the guy who eventually told physicians to do no harm, though, let's be honest, many still did. His theory that the human body is ruled by 4 fluids, or humus, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health means keeping these humus in balance. Sickness, a sign that one of them has gone rogue. Got a fever, too much blood. Let's drain it. Headache, probably phlegm. Time to fast and maybe chew on willow bark. Feeling melancholic. Must be black bile. Why not go for a walk, write a poem, or stare moodily into the sea while reciting tragic verses? These treatments are part science, part guesswork, and part emotional support goat. Historians still debate whether ancient Greek doctors were more effective than the herbalists and midwives who came before them. But what's undeniable is that the practice of medicine was often a mix of empirical observation and pure ritualized winging it. And then there's surgery, which is generally a last resort, and for good reason. Let's say your leg is badly wounded, infection is setting in. You need amputation. The tools, a knife, some iron tongs, and a lot of hope. Anesthesia hasn't been invented yet, so your pain relief involves biting on a leather strap and screaming into the nearest pillow. Cauterization. The process of burning the wound closed is your best chance at survival, and it smells like roasted regret. No antiseptic, no sterilized gloves, no antiseptic scrub nurse humming a lullaby, just your uncle holding your shoulder while someone with questionable eyesight saws through bone. And yet, Greek doctors did manage a few impressive feats. They could set broken bones, drain abscesses, and suture wounds with surprising efficiency. They understood the importance of diet, rest, and clean air. They examined urine, listened to breathing, and even performed crude autopsies when religious rules didn't get in the way. Oddly enough, some of the best Greek healers were midwives. These women knew their stuff: herbs for pain techniques, for turning breech babies, and rituals that calmed nerves during childbirth. They were both respected and feared. A midwife might be the only person who could bring you safely into the world, and if you were a woman, she was also the one who might help you leave it. Because childbirth terrifying, there are no ultrasounds, no epidurals, no fetal monitors. You go into labor and hope the gods are in a good mood. A single complication breach hemorrhage infection, and it's game over for both mother and child. It's no surprise that one of the most common inscriptions on women's tombs is, "She died in childbirth." There are no second chances, no scheduled C-sections, just screaming sweat and a midwife whispering ancient prayers over your body. And then there are the art temples. Sometimes, when regular medicine fails, you turn to divine healing. You travel, if you're able to, one of the sacred temples of Asclepius, the god of medicine. The most famous is at Epidaurus, with its long colonnades, sacred springs, and snoring pilgrims. Here you undergo a process called incubation. You cleanse yourself, you offer sacrifices, you sleep in a sacred dormitory and hope the god visits you in your dreams. Maybe he'll appear with advice. Maybe he'll send a snake, his sacred animal, to lick your wounds. Maybe you'll just wake up cured with no memory of how. Or maybe you won't wake up at all. Still people came. Because in a world where garlic vinegar compresses and bloodletting often fail, divine intervention starts to sound pretty reasonable. But say you don't go to a temple. Say you stay home and ride it out. What then? If you're poor, your remedies are limited to what grows nearby. Fenelmin Bay leaves garlic honey. Honey is a favorite, used on wounds, in teas, in tonics. Not because it's sweet, but because it actually works. It has antimicrobial properties. Your grandmother might smear it on your cut and whisper a charm. You roll your eyes until it starts to feel better. You try not to drink too much water. You stick to wine water instead. It's safer. Hydration without infection, but it makes you dizzy, and now you're not sure if it's the fever or the fermentation. You sleep on your mat shivering. A neighbor drops by with dried figs. Someone offers you a sprig of rue tied with red thread meant to ward off spirits. You accept. It can't hurt. Your dreams are strange. Snakes, gods, floating herbs. You think you hear someone chanting. Maybe it's your cousin. Maybe it's the god of healing himself. You wake up sweaty but alive. That's a win. Because the truth is, in ancient Greece, any recovery is a miracle. You live in a world where one scratch can turn septic, where fevers kill quickly, where infection is faster than understanding. You have no antibiotics, no antiseptic, no diagnostics. What you do have is instant community and a whole lot of trial and error. Sometimes things work, sometimes they don't, but the human spirit that somehow keeps going. And now as the sun sets, you sit on your stoop with a cup of lukewarm wine. You've survived another illness, maybe not fully healed, but upright. Someone passes by and nods. You nod back. You made it. At least until tomorrow. You've survived a fever with nothing but diluted wine, crushed herbs, and a midwife's whispered chant. You're sore dizzy and probably still lightly flammable from last week's olive oil bath, but alive. And that's what matters. Because tonight your body may still ache, but your soul, well, it's about to get a workout of its own. Welcome to the theater, ancient Greece's most emotionally exhausting civic obligation disguised as entertainment. Let's be clear. Theater here isn't a casual evening out with overpriced snacks and a velvet seat. It's an all-day, open-air, religious, emotionally devastating marathon of murder, incest, comedy, and catharsis, served under the blistering sun, seated on stone and surrounded by thousands of equally sweaty citizens. You don't pay for a ticket. The state subsidizes your attendance because this isn't just art. It's civic duty. Everyone who qualifies as a citizen is expected to attend. Everyone else, women, slaves, foreigners, can try to sneak a peek from the hillside, but officially this show is for the chosen few with voting rights and sunstroke immunity. You shuffle into the amphitheater at dawn. The great theater of Dionysus in Athens is a massive semicircle carved into the side of a hill with tiered stone seats that might have been comfortable the day they were built, but now feel like punishment for not voting hard enough. You sit shoulder to shoulder with bakers, farmers, veterans, philosophers, and your neighbor who once tried to sell you a cursed amphora. There's no shade, no restroom, no intermission, just the promise of emotional devastation from sunrise to sunset. On stage, the Or Exif Dionysia festival, Biesteshel, begins, a sacred ritual honoring Dionysus, god of wine, ecstasy, and questionable decisions. 3 full days of performance, tragedies in the morning, comedies in the afternoon, and Weber Satyr plays. Somewhere in between, because nothing says, let's explore moral decay, like a chorus of drunk half-goat-men making rude noises. The first play begins. The actors wear towering masks, with exaggerated expressions, one for smiling, one for agony, another for dramatic gasping. These masks are made of linen cork or wood painted boldly, so the person sitting 60 rows back can tell if the hero is sad, angry, or dying. Costumes are elaborate, flowing robes, platform sandals, and in comedies certain anatomical enhancements. Yes, there are giant fake phalluses. It's not subtle. The tragedy unfolds. A king ignores a prophecy, murders his father, marries his mother, and ends up blinding himself. The audience gasps, weeps, whispers. The chorus steps in singing in unison, echoing moral dilemmas, foreshadowing doom, or just reacting like an ancient Twitter feed. You feel it in your gut. Not because it's your story, but because somehow it is. That's the whole point. This is catharsis. Emotional purging through the suffering of others. You're meant to feel anguish, pity, dread. You're meant to see the terrible fall of a great man and think, there, but for the grace of the gods go I. Historians still debate whether audiences truly internalized the moral messages or just showed up for the spectacle of shouting and stabbing. Then comes the comedy, which isn't lighthearted exactly. It's satirical, biting, savage, honestly. Playwrights like Aristophanes take no prisoners. They mock politicians, philosophers, the military, the gods, even the very audience sitting in those sun-baked rows. The jokes are bawdy, the language crude. There's a talking pig, a man dressed as a giant sausage, a chorus of frogs croaking rhythmically about metaphysics. You laugh until you wheeze, half from amusement, half from dehydration. Someone in the back yells a crude pun and the whole crowd roars. A fig vendor starts chanting along with the chorus. For a moment, you forget the heat, the hunger, the blisters on your heels. You're just another Greek caught in the ecstatic absurdity of the stage. And then, the satyr play. Imagine a raunchy parody where the characters from the morning tragedy show up again only drunk half naked and dancing in goat tails. The same king who murdered his family now trips over a wine jug while a chorus of satyrs sings about flatulence. You're confused, intrigued, uncomfortable. Perfect. That's exactly how the ancient Greeks wanted you to feel. Because theatre wasn't just escape. It was reflection. It was where your city explored its deepest fears, war betrayal, divine punishment, and then laughed about it, cried about it, sang about it in unison in public under the open sky. And it was a competition. At the end of the festival, a jury, ordinary citizens chosen by lot votes on the best playwright. There are no ballots, no applause meters, just clay tokens, heated arguments, and the crushing realization that your favorite play, about the woman who poisoned her family with wine, might lose to a farce involving a talking donkey. Still, winning matters. The victorious playwright becomes a cultural hero, their name etched into stone, their story remembered. Losing, well, better luck next festival. You stand up, legs numb, skin slightly burned, brain completely fried. The sun has begun to set. You haven't eaten since that barley brick 12 hours ago, and your stomach has started making noises that scare nearby children. You stumble down the hill, passing actors removing their masks, chorus members swigging wine, and citizens arguing passionately about who should have won. You hear someone declare, "The second play had better use of irony." Another mutters, "The pig god was too derivative." You pass a drunk man reciting lines from memory tears in his eyes. A teenage boy hums a melody from the chorus. 2 old women whisper about whether the playwright was secretly mocking the assembly, and you realize this is more than entertainment. Theater here is a mirror, a lesson, a purging, a celebration, a therapy session with 10,000 participants and no bathroom breaks. You walk home slowly, feet so heartful. You've wept, laughed, and seen yourself, your flaws, your fears played out in masks and verse. You're a little more human now, a little more aware of how close everyone walks to disaster, and how absurd, beautiful, and fragile life can be. You reach your small house, the clay tiles still warm from the day. Inside, your family sits quietly. You share what you saw clumsily, not with poetry, but with hand gestures and half-remembered lines. Someone smiles, someone frowns, a child pretends to be a satyr and knocks over a jug. You'll sleep tonight with images in your mind, gods weeping, kings, falling pigs talking. And somehow, even if your bones ache and your skin still smells like vinegar and dreams, you feel better. Because in ancient Greece, the stage is not just a stage. It's a place where life is stripped down, magnified, and thrown back at you, sometimes screaming, sometimes singing, sometimes wearing a goat tail. Tomorrow you'll go back to sweating, scraping olive oil, and trying not to get kicked by a donkey. But for tonight, you've been part of something bigger. You've been part of the story. You've wept at the theatre roasted under the sun with 10,000 strangers and stumbled home with goat tail comedy echoing in your head. You should be winding down, maybe enjoying a moment of peace by a flickering oil lamp. But no, this is ancient Greece, and peace is for the dead, because just as you're settling in with a crust of barley bread and your last nerve, philosophy comes for you, not in a quiet book or an inspirational quote. No. Philosophy in ancient Athens is loud, disruptive, relentless, and personal. You're minding your business in the agora, buying figs, arguing about olive prices. Maybe checking out a new pair of sandals, and suddenly a man in a dirty robe walks up and asks, "Do you believe in justice?" You pause. Yes. He tilts his head like a curious owl. "And what is justice?" And just like that, you've been Socrates. Because in Athens, philosophy isn't confined to dusty libraries or whispered conversations between monks. It's a equilibrium contact sport. A street performance, a full-on intellectual ambush that could happen anywhere at any time, whether you're ready or not. Socrates, yes. That Socrates is the king of this tactic. He doesn't write anything down. He doesn't teach in a classroom. He wanders the streets barefoot, unwashed, asking questions until his targets either burst into tears or storm off muttering about their childhood traumas. His method, the Socratic method, ask again. Ask until your confidence collapses and you're questioning the meaning of chairs. Historians still debate whether Socrates was a genius teacher or just the most annoying man in Athens. His targets are ordinary people, artisans, merchants, politicians. He'll walk up to the potter and ask if he understands virtue. To the baker, is goodness kneaded or baked? No one is safe, especially not you. You try to escape. You say, "I've got a chicken on the spit," or "My goat needs milking." Doesn't matter. Socrates follows calmly asking, "But do you truly own the goat? Or is ownership an illusion created by perception?" You want to scream. And he's not alone. There's Plato, his student, walking around like a dreamy philosopher prince, always talking about the form's ideal abstract versions of everything. According to Plato, your lumpy dinner roll isn't real bread. It's just an imperfect reflection of the ideal bread that exists in some transcendent unknowable realm. You stare at your dinner, it looks fine. Then there's Aristotle. Plato's student. He's more grounded. He catalogues everything. Plants, animals, dreams, household chores. He writes about all of it. He loves logic categories, purpose. He's the guy who walks into your garden and starts naming your weeds by genus. Between these three, they form the holy trinity of philosophical disruption. And they're not alone. The city is full of thinkers, orators, skeptics, sophists, and the people who just enjoy shouting metaphors at each other until someone throws a sandal. You overhear a debate between two men. One argues that nothing is real unless you can touch it. The other says reality is only perception. They're yelling about chairs. Again, always chairs. You try to buy some olives. The vendor says these are just physical olives, but what is the essence of olive? You leave. You don't need this. But here's a twist deep down you're starting to like it. Because in ancient Athens, philosophy is a way of life. It's not about memorizing doctrines or quoting dead men. It's about living deliberately, asking why, peeling back assumptions, confronting your own ignorance like a heroic journey, one where the dragon is your ego and the sword is relentless curiosity. Children are raised to question. Boys recite, Homer argue with their tutors, wrestle at the gymnasium, then sit cross-legged while a grey-bearded man rants about whether the universe is made of air or numbers. Philosophy spills into everything. Ethics, politics, love, education, nature, art. You can't walk 5 steps without someone launching into a theory about justice, pleasure the soul, or what makes a life worth living. And sure, sometimes it feels like intellectual chaos. But at its core, this city believes in that thought, dialogue, and in speaking and being heard, in defending ideas and destroying illusions. You remember that time you told Socrates you believed in truth. And he asked, what is truth? And then 5 hours later, you found yourself crying softly next to a cheese cart while reconsidering your life goals. It was awful. It was amazing. There are schools now. Academies, formal gatherings of students and teachers. Plato's Academy, for instance, a beautiful grove where young minds gather to explore geometry, ethics, astronomy, and the metaphysical weight of fingernails. Admission is free if you can keep up. If you say something foolish, be prepared to be corrected in front of the fig trees. Even Aristotle has a school, the Lyceum. He likes to walk while teaching, pacing back and forth, unraveling the secrets of the cosmos with a casual flick of his hand. You're lucky if you catch a glimpse. He might be explaining how virtue is a habit, or how the earth is the center of the universe, or how everything has a purpose, even flies. Yes, even the one buzzing in your ear right now. Meanwhile, Epicurus is starting his own little community. He says life is about avoiding pain and seeking moderate pleasure. Not luxury, just peace. A garden, a loaf of bread, a friend who doesn't ask what chairs are. His followers are calm, quiet, and suspiciously well-fed. Then there are the Stoics among people who believe that the only thing you can truly control is your mind. Pain accepted, loss accepted. Goat stepped on your foot. Accept it with grace. They practice detachment, resilience, and really good posture. You've never felt so overwhelmed. Your head is full. Your heart is stirred. You're not sure whether to cry nap or write a poem about chairs. You sit in the agora watching the sun dip behind the temples and feel something settle deep in your bones. A strange kind of clarity. Because for all the chaos, all the interruptions, all the public interrogations about abstract nouns, philosophy in ancient Greece isn't about winning arguments. It's about becoming better, sharper, kinder, wiser, or at the very least, aware. And yes, some of these thinkers will be misunderstood. Some will be hated. Some, like Socrates, will be condemned to death for corrupting the youth and not believing in the gods. But their ideas won't die. They'll travel. They'll evolve. They'll inspire revolutions, constitutions, and bedtime conversations thousands of years from now. You sit under the stars now, the agora quiet. A few vendors pack up their carts. A child chases a cat. Somewhere nearby, someone is still talking about justice. And you're thinking, not about olives, not about chores, but about yourself. And in that moment, you are truly Greek. By now, you've endured. The theater survived a philosophical ambush by Socrates, and possibly entered a minor identity crisis over the nature of chairs. You might think your emotional bandwidth is full. That surely the city has run out of ways to surprise or exhaust you. But no, because just as you're starting to feel like you belong, just as you've memorized your favorite fig seller's name and figured out how to keep your keton from slipping during political debates, Athens reminds you of a peculiar, terrifying truth. Popularity can get you exiled. That's right, not jailed, not fined, just yeeted from the city, officially for being too visible. Welcome to the world of ostracism. Perhaps the pettiest, most democratic form of social rejection in history. Once a year, the male citizens of Athens gather to decide whether an ostracism should take place. They meet, discuss, shout, and if the mood feels right, if someone's power or influence has started making people nervous, they hold a vote, not to elect someone, to banish them. Here's how it works. If enough citizens agree that an ostracism should happen, everyone writes down the name of the person they want gone on a piece of broken pottery called an ostrakon. These are not fancy ballots. They are literal shards of discarded vases. It's passive aggression with artistic flair. If at least six certain people scratch the same name onto their shards, that person is exiled for 10 years. No trial, no defense, no explanation needed. You don't have to be guilty of anything. You just have to be a little too charismatic, or too wealthy, or too persuasive, or you wore your hymation too confidently in the Agra, and now the fishmonger resents you. Historians still debate whether ostracism was a safeguard against tyranny or just organized jealousy with a quorum. Either way, once your name is announced, you're expected to leave politely. You pack your things, hug your goat, and walk away. Your house stays untouched. Your property is left alone. After a decade, you're welcome to return. No grudges, no accusations. Just 10 years of countryside reflection, while Athens decides whether it misses you or not. It's brutal, and it's happened to some of Athens' greatest minds. Take Themistocles, the man who masterminded the Greek naval victory at the Battle of Salamis. Without him, Persia might have steamrolled through Greece. He saved the city, received heaps of praise, and then a few years later was ostracized. Too popular, too influential, too much. Or Aristides the Just, so famously upright and moral that one citizen, when asked why he wrote down his name on the ostracon, reportedly said, "I'm just tired of hearing him called the Just." Yes, Athens literally kicked someone out for having too good a reputation. Ostracism doesn't necessarily ruin a person, but it sends a message: don't get too comfortable. Don't gather too much support. Don't start looking like a king, because this is democracy, and democracy will gladly banish you just to prove it can. You, meanwhile, begin to look at your own reputation with suspicion. Are you speaking too eloquently in the assembly? Have your recent public comments about tax reform garnered applause? Did someone laugh too hard at your joke during the festival? You start dialing it down. Your speeches get shorter, your opinions safer. You stop combing your hair quite so well. You're trying to survive in a society that believes in equality through self-sabotage. Still, you can't help but feel paranoid. You see your name etched on a random ostracon left behind by a careless voter, and you wonder, was that meant for me? Probably not, but what if it was? Athens is a city of voices, but the louder yours becomes, the more people wonder if it needs to be silenced. There's something beautifully ironic about all this. A place that gave birth to democracy, philosophy, theater, and civic pride also invented our cancel culture, 2,500 years ahead of schedule, and they didn't even need a hashtag, just pottery shards and a communal grudge. But ostracism isn't the only form of public rejection. There are also the public trials out there where citizens can bring legal accusations against anyone, yes, anyone, and act as their own prosecutors. No lawyers, no judges in wigs, just you, your opponent, and a jury of hundreds of ordinary men who may or may not like your sandals. In fact, Socrates himself, yes, the same man who turned your shopping trip into a Socratic nightmare, was put on trial. In 399 BCE, his crimes corrupting the youth and not believing in the city's gods, basically being a nuisance with good metaphors. He was given a chance to apologize, to beg for leniency. Instead, he doubled down, gave a long defiant speech about truth, virtue, and the examined life. The jury voted. He was found guilty, sentenced to death. He drank hemlock, quietly, on principle. And so Athens, the city that birthed critical thinking, executed the man who embodied it. Historians still debate whether the trial was political religious or just the tragic result of too many rhetorical questions. But the message lingers: speak freely, yes. But be careful who's listening. And yet, for all this danger, for all the pottery-based purges, public shaming, and existential courtrooms Athens keeps going, people still speak, still vote, still argue, because underneath the risk is a strange, unshakable belief. Words matter. Ideas matter. Dialogue is dangerous, yes, but it's also sacred. So you stay. You lower your voice sometimes. You choose your words with more care. But you keep showing up. Keep writing your name on the potsherd, sometimes for others, sometimes against. You're part of the system, flawed as it is. You begin to understand that a democracy is not always fair, not always kind, but it's active, alive, shaped by its people, for better or worse. And when you walk through the agora and see someone standing on a crate preaching about justice, again, you don't scoff. You stop, you listen, and maybe you even answer. Because in ancient Athens, power doesn't just come from wealth or bloodline. It comes from participation, from being heard, even if the next thing you hear is your name being read off an ostrakon. You've endured speeches, carried shields, and maybe even seen your name etched onto a shard of pottery with a little too much casual confidence. You've dodged exile, scraped olive oil off your limbs, and survived being interrogated mid-snack by a man in a robe who insists reality is a shadow on a cave wall. Now you wake up one morning with a new thought in your head. Something quiet but persistent. Am I going to die soon? Because here's the unfiltered truth in ancient Greece. Death was not a possibility, it was a certainty. And not even a particularly distant one. The average life expectancy hovered around 30 to 35 years. If you made it past childhood, congratulations, just don't get too attached to your organs. Let's break it down. Childhood mortality, sky high. Somewhere between 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 children died before reaching adulthood. That wasn't a fluke. It was the norm. Birth was dangerous. Childhood was fragile. Medicine was speculative at best, and occasionally just garlic paste and wishful thinking. You could die from an infected splinter, a bad goat's milk batch, or stepping on the wrong snake. Historians still debate the exact survival rates, but the archaeological evidence is grim. Tiny graves, small skeletons, inscriptions with names that never made it past their 5th birthday. Entire families wiped out by plagues or food shortages. Grief wasn't rare, it was stitched into the rhythm of life. If you're lucky enough to reach adulthood, you now face a gauntlet of new and equally lethal threats. Let's start with war. There's always a war. Maybe it's Athens versus Sparta. Maybe Sparta versus everyone. Maybe someone from a neighboring polis looked at your goat the wrong way and now you're marching with a spear towards someone else's olive grove. You fight in tight formation side by side with men you grew up with. If one of them stumbles, the line breaks. If the line breaks, the enemy pours in. One well-placed javelin and your future plans for fatherhood and home ownership are gone in a blur of bronze and confusion. You don't always die immediately in war. Sometimes you're lucky enough to make it home with a crushed ribcage, a festering wound, or a limp that won't go away. There's no antibiotics, no physical therapy. You heal or you don't. And that's just war. Let's talk plague. You remember the plague of Athens? Of course you do. Everyone does. During the Peloponnesian War, the city became so overcrowded that illness spread like wildfire. Within just a few years, 1/3 of the population was gone. Not missing, gone. Dead, cremated, buried in mass graves, or simply left on the outskirts of the city when the living couldn't keep up. Thucydides, the historian who chronicled the war, wrote about it in chilling detail. He even got the plague himself. Survived and came back to write about how terrifying it was to watch society unravel. People gave up caring, priests stopped attending funerals, the sick were left to die alone. Morality collapsed under the weight of hopelessness. You can't even imagine what that smells like. Or maybe you can. You've walked past the fish stalls in the afternoon heat. Now multiply that by a city and add the smell of burning clothes and the sound of people coughing blood. And You don't have to wait for a full-blown pandemic to die young. You could just drink the wrong cup of water. There's no germ theory, no understanding of bacteria. You might wash your hands before a meal because someone told you it pleases the gods, but that doesn't mean your water isn't full of invisible death. Wells get contaminated. Rivers are used for bathing, cooking, and waste, sometimes all within 20 yards of each other. You learn to drink wine mixed with water, not for the buzz, but for the sterilization. Of course, the alcohol content is low. It's more like desperate purification. And it doesn't always work. That upset stomach might be mild food poisoning, or it might be your final meal. Even if you manage to avoid war and plague and bad wine, there's still haggard childbirth. If you're a woman, every pregnancy carries with it the very real possibility of death. There are no ultrasounds, no emergency surgeries, no epidurals. A breech birth can be fatal. Twins risky. A single wrong movement during labor catastrophic. A lot of women die in their teens shortly after being married off. You don't get time to grow, learn, or thrive. You are a vessel for heirs, and if your body fails the job, you are replaced. Sometimes remembered, sometimes not. And what happens after you die? That depends. Burial matters a lot. The Greeks believed that if you didn't receive proper rites, your soul would wander restlessly between worlds. No burial, no peace. Your family is expected to clean the body, anoint it with oils, wrap it in cloth, place a coin under your tongue to pay Charon, the ferryman of the dead, and then hold a funeral with mourning, singing, and food. If you're poor, this gets harder. Sometimes the coin is missing, sometimes the burial is shallow rushed. In dire times, the dead are abandoned. Not because people are cruel, but because the living can't afford to die properly. Even worse, if your family can't afford the rituals, you might be forgotten. No tomb, no plaque, no memory. Just one more soul, drifting in the underworld unseen. And then, of course, there are the gods. Ah, yes, those celestial drama magnets. You could be living a perfectly nice life and still get struck down for offering the wrong sacrifice at the wrong time to the wrong god. Step on sacred land, punishable. Forget to leave a coin at a shrine, cursed. Say something snarky about Hera, while drunk, prepare for a plague of boils, or your goats mysteriously running off cliffs. The gods aren't gentle. They're not warm, cuddly protectors. They're powerful, vengeful, moody beings who demand respect, offerings, prayers, and public festivals. And even if you do all that right, they might still smite you for something your great-grandfather did in a dream. So you live each day with this delicate awareness that death is never far. A goat can trip and crush your ribs. A fig could choke you. A boat might capsize. A storm might strike. Or maybe you'll simply fall asleep and never wake up. And yet people keep going. They build homes. They fall in love. They write poems. They dance under the stars. They argue about politics and the metaphysical essence of chairs. They name their children after heroes. They laugh, mourn, sing, and debate. Because despite the brutal unpredictability of life, the Greeks never stopped finding ways to give it meaning. You walk through the agora at dusk. A funeral procession passes. The women wail, the men walk quietly. You bow your head, not because you knew the man, but because you know what it means to live in a world where the end is always near. And somehow knowing that makes everything sharper. The olives taste stronger. The fig leaves smell sweeter. The sun, even in its cruelty, feels more personal. You are mortal. You are temporary, and in that fleetingness you matter. Even if tomorrow brings plague or war or exile on a pottery shard, tonight you sit with friends, drink watered wine, and tell stories that will outlast your bones. Because this fragile, fiery, impermanent life is all you have. And somehow it is enough. The wind shifts. The cicadas quiet. Somewhere in the hills beyond the olive groves, a goat bleat, like it's been told philosophy is mandatory. You're still alive, still blinking under the sun, still covered in yesterday's sweat and a thin layer of philosophical regret. And just when you think you've finally made peace with the chaotic mess that is ancient Greece, you remember something that makes your stomach clench like a fist. The gods. They are everywhere. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, literally everywhere. You can't walk 5 steps without running into a shrine, a small altar, or someone mid-prayer muttering to a fig tree. Religion in ancient Greece is not optional. It's not just a belief system, it's infrastructure. It's insurance. It's the invisible glue barely holding this sunburnt civilization together. Forget temples as occasional destinations. The gods live in your walls, your meals, your wine, your street corners. They watch you bathe, bake, fight, marry, and sneeze. They demand attention, constantly, lavishly, with incense, wine, honey cakes, goats, bulls, garlands, dances, hymns, processions, and the occasional human-sized statue carved with enough muscle definition to make you feel bad about yourself. You start your day with a whispered prayer to Hestia, goddess of the hearth. You offer a sliver of bread, maybe a splash of wine. Before lunch, you nod to Hermes for safe travels. Yes, even if you're just going to the agora to argue about lentil prices. You thank Demeter for your barley and curse Poseidon if the fishmonger overcharges. And if you forget, if you skip a ritual or miss a festival, well, that's when things start to unravel. Because the Olympian gods aren't peaceful spirits who sit on clouds sending you good vibes. No, these deities are powerful, emotional, vindictive, and often just bored. They hold grudges. They cause plagues. They make snakes appear in your bed or unleash wild boars into your crops. And they never forget a slight, even if it was 3 generations ago and committed by someone with your name. Historians still debate how much the average Greek actually believed in divine punishment versus just trying to avoid being socially cursed by their neighbors for not sacrificing enough chickens. And yet fear is only half the equation. The other half, dependence. Because in this world where childbirth can kill, a cut can fester, and war is just Tuesday, you need divine favor. Like, your life depends on it because it often does. Let's meet a few of the heavy hitters, shall we? Zeus. King of the gods, wielder of thunderbolts, serial philanderer, worshipped across all of Greece with massive temples and frequent sacrifices. You pray to him for justice, weather, and not being turned into a tree because you looked at someone the wrong way. Hera, goddess of marriage, wife of Zeus, and eternal patron of vengeance. She punishes anyone Zeus flirts with, including the mortals who didn't ask for it. You honor her out of fear and admiration, and maybe because you saw what she did to that one guy who forgot to dedicate a shrine on his wedding day. Spoiler, it involved frogs. Apollo, god of music, light and plagues. The original guy with a lyre who can both heal and destroy. Worshipping him is complicated. On one hand, he brings order and reason. On the other, he once cursed someone with an arrow made of sickness. You leave offerings just in case he's in one of his moods. Artemis, his twin sister, goddess of the hunt, the moon, and wild things, protector of virgins and animals. You pray to her when giving birth or wandering into forests, because sometimes she turns people into deer and lets her followers chase them with spears. Athena, goddess of wisdom and war strategy, the brainy one with a helmet, patron of Athens, born fully grown from Zeus's forehead, which sounds metaphorical, but the Greeks meant it very literally. She's calm, calculating, and terrifying in battle. Your city loves her, but never assume she's soft. Astanitaka, the other war god, the violent, blood-splattered one. Everyone respects him, but not many actually like him. Even the other gods think he's kind of a loose cannon. You pray to him before battle, then immediately try to appease someone else afterward just in case. Dionysus, god of wine madness and theatre, the fun one, but also the one who sends people into vine-choked frenzies where they rip wild animals or each other apart with their bare hands. You celebrate him during festivals that involve masks, torches, and way too much drinking, which is exactly how he likes it. And let's not forget Poseidon, Demeter, Hades, and the countless nymphs, spirits, Menaibu heroes, and demigods lurking in every grove, river, and echo. There's even a god of boundaries, Hermes, Again, a goddess of revenge, nemesis, and a being who personifies sleep, Hypnos, whom you're probably wishing would show up soon. You honor the gods with rituals, sacrifices, songs, you light incense or you leave olive branches, you kneel, you recite hymns you barely understand, and sometimes you get nothing in return. Because unlike modern spirituality, ancient Greek religion doesn't guarantee comfort. It doesn't promise love or peace. It doesn't whisper you're enough. It says, try harder, offer more, we might notice. And yet the gods are still yours. Personal, chaotic, flawed. They feel what you feel, lust, rage, jealousy, pride. They embody your fears and hopes, your worst instincts and highest ideals. And somehow worshipping them makes your messy life feel connected. Like your suffering has context, like your pain is not random but divine drama. Even festivals are more burdened than party. Take the Panathenaia, Athens' biggest festival in honor of Athena. There are parades, athletic competitions, poetry recitals, sacrifices, and a massive new robe woven by women and paraded through the city like a divine debutante dress. It's beautiful, it's exhausting, it's mandatory. Then there's the Eleusinian mysteries. Secretive rituals honoring Demeter and Persephone. Participation requires initiation, swearing oaths, walking from Athens to Eleusis, fastings, torches, silence. It's intense, mystical, and possibly terrifying. But if you go through with it, you're promised a better afterlife. Maybe. The gods offer no guarantees, but they offer meaning. And that in this fragile, sun-drenched, lice-adjacent life is everything. So when your neighbor sacrifices a chicken for rain, or builds a tiny shrine in their courtyard with breadcrumbs and flower petals, you don't laugh. You join in, you whisper a prayer, you touch the altar. Because even if it's nonsense, even if Zeus doesn't actually care about your barley harvest, it feels better to be seen by something, even if it's an immortal soap opera cast with wings. And when you finally crawl into your bed, if you're lucky enough to have one, you light a lamp for Kipu Hecate, the goddess of threshold, ghosts, and crossroads. She watches over doorways and dreams. You close your eyes, offer a final prayer, and hope your soul doesn't wander out while you sleep. Because in ancient Greece, the gods are never sleeping. But maybe, just maybe, you are. The moon rises slowly over Athens, casting long shadows across the Acropolis. Somewhere down in the city, a lyre plays a slow, haunting melody. You lie on your straw mat bones, sore skin warm from the lingering sun, and brain. Well, your brain has officially checked out for the day. You've dodged exiles, endured tragedy, scraped yourself clean with bronze, been ambushed by philosophers, and tried to keep the gods from smiting your household. It's enough to make even a hardened hoplite cry quietly into his barley loaf. And yet the final thought that drifts across your mind before sleep is this. You wouldn't last a single day in ancient Greece. Not really. Let's say, by some strange twist of fate, you actually woke up tomorrow in a modest Athenian home. You would open your eyes and immediately be confronted with an avalanche of discomforts. There's no bed, just a coarse mat that smells faintly of damp straw and regret. The air is hot and still. There is no glass in the window, no curtain, just shutters and the occasional goat looking in like it's judging your life choices. You reach for your phone, there is no phone. You want water, walk to the fountain. You want to pee. Hope you enjoy squatting behind a wall, praying no one walks past. You want food, barley, and olives. Again. For the 7th time this week. And your clothes, well, we've covered that. One piece of linen, one pin, and no support. Your thighs are going to chafe like never before. There's no toothpaste, no soap, no air conditioning, no shoes with cushioning, no toilet paper, no bath bombs, no coffee, no snacks, no weekends, no quiet. Because ancient Greece is loud. The streets echo with vendors clanging metal animal noises and the occasional public execution. People shout, they debate. They argue about poetry tax's family and whether or not Euripides is overrated. Even if you survive the hygiene shock, the diet, the climate, and the collective odor, you'll quickly discover the deeper discomfort. You don't matter. Unless you are a free-born male citizen with Athenian parents and a full shield set, you're invisible in public life. If you're a woman, you're hidden. If you're a slave, you're property. If you're a foreigner, you'll never vote. If you're sick, you'll be lucky to get a crust of honey bread and a priest who mumbles convincingly. And let's not forget the fear. It hangs everywhere like dust. Fear of disease. Fear of the gods. Fear of being exiled. Fear of being too loud, too smart, too successful. Fear that one day you'll sneeze during a ritual or step into a sacred grove or forget to burn incense before a storm and suddenly your crops fail, your children fall ill, and a strange rash appears that no one wants to touch. This society, for all its brilliance, is fragile. Balanced precariously on rituals, expectations, and deeply embedded inequalities. It can turn on you in a moment. You can be a hero one day and cast out the next. There's no constitution, no lawyer, no therapy. And yet, you begin to see the cracks where the light gets in. Despite everything these people, Ipretty, built wonders. They carved temples from marble. They invented democracy, not perfect, but a beginning. They stood in theaters all day sobbing over tragic flaws and laughing at giant fallacies. They argued passionately about the soul, about the stars, about love, faith, beauty, and truth. They questioned the world even as it burned around them. They made art. They made meaning. They suffered, and they didn't pretend they didn't. They embraced the chaos good and turned it into chorus. You begin to understand that their strength wasn't in their spears or their tunics or their painfully chewy bread. Their strength was in their resilience, their ability to endure, to live day after day in a world where the gods could smite you, where the river might poison you, where your own neighbor might write your name on a broken plate, and still they created. Still they gathered to share stories, to speak and to listen, to argue, to laugh, to sing. They built the bones of Western civilization while sweating through heat waves, dodging plagues, and squatting behind stone walls. And no, you wouldn't last a day. You'd fold before lunch. But they did. They carried water under the sun. They marched with sore feet and heavy shields. They scraped olive oil from their skin. They burned offerings. They danced. They mourned. They worshipped gods who barely noticed them and still found joy in the flicker of a flame or the sound of a well-plucked lyre. They lived knowing how short life was, and maybe that's why they lived it so fiercely. So, if you somehow found yourself in that world, waking up to the heat, fumbling with your tunic, avoiding another impromptu debate about the nature of the cosmos, you might struggle at first. But over time, maybe you'd find rhythm in the ritual. Maybe you'd see a neighbor mourning her child and offer your last fig. Maybe you'd stop rushing and start noticing the way the wind shifts through the olive trees, the weight of a ceramic cup in your hand, the murmur of the gods in the distance. Maybe you'd learn to carry the absurd and the profound in the same breath, just like they did. And if you made it to the end of your short blazing life, you'd look back not with regret, but awe. Because in ancient Greece, life wasn't easy, but it wasn't everything.